Nathaniel Sterling stood at the window of his penthouse office, looking down at the city he practically owned. His reflection showed a man who had everything money could buy: the perfect suit, the perfect watch, the perfect life. But something felt empty today, just like it had for the past 10 years. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Sterling, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Nathaniel straightened his tie and grabbed his tablet. Another day, another $1 million. That's what his life had become. At 40 years old, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Magazines called him ruthless, brilliant, and unstoppable. Nobody knew about the photo he kept locked in his desk drawer, the one of a young girl with flowing dark hair and eyes that used to make his heart stop. The board meeting dragged on as usual. Old men in expensive suits arguing about profit margins and market shares. Nathaniel barely listened. His mind kept drifting to the upcoming weekend. He had to visit his family's old estate for his mother's birthday celebration. He hadn't been there in years, not since. He pushed the thought away. That was the past. Elena was the past. The garden renovation project needs your approval, his secretary reminded him later that day. Your mother insists on having everything perfect for her party. The garden, where he first met Elena Ruiz, where they shared their first kiss, where he made promises he didn't keep. Saturday came too quickly. Nathaniel's driver pulled up to the sprawling mansion where he grew up. Nothing had changed. The marble fountains, the rose bushes, the perfectly trimmed hedges. His mother, Margaret Sterling, waited at the entrance, elegant as always in her designer dress. "Darling, you're finally here." She kissed his cheek, leaving a trace of expensive lipstick. "You work too much. You need to visit more often." "Business keeps me busy, Mother." "Too busy for family. Come, everyone's by the pool." Nathaniel followed her through the house, nodding at relatives he barely remembered. He needed a drink. The sound of children laughing caught his attention as they passed by the large windows overlooking the back garden. He stopped dead in his tracks. 4 boys, probably around 9 or 10 years old, were playing soccer on the lawn. 4 identical faces, 4 sets of dark curls, 4 pairs of green eyes. His green eyes. The world tilted beneath his feet. "Mother," his voice came out strangled. "Who are those children?" Margaret looked uncomfortable. "Oh, they belong to Elena. You remember? Eleanor, the gardener's daughter. She works here now, managing the grounds. She does wonderful work, really." Nathaniel couldn't breathe. Elena, here. With 4 boys who looked exactly like him. One of the boys kicked the ball too hard and it flew toward the window. They all turned to watch it, and Nathaniel saw his own childhood face multiplied by 4, staring back at him. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Nathaniel, please, it's my birthday. Let's not—" But he was already striding toward the garden, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. 10 years. 10 years of building his empire, of telling himself he'd made the right choice walking away from the gardener's daughter to pursue his ambitions. And there she was. Elena stood by the rose bushes, pruning shears in hand, more beautiful than he. Remembered. The years had turned her into a woman, strong and graceful. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and the pain that flashed in her eyes felt like a knife to his chest. "Elena." "Mr. Sterling." Her voice was cold, formal, nothing. Like the way she used to whisper his name. The boys had stopped playing, watching them curiously. Nathaniel couldn't take his eyes off them. His sons, they had to be his sons. Why? The word came out raw, angry. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "Tell you? I tried to tell you, Nathaniel. I called your office dozens of times. When I found out I was pregnant, I wrote letters, but you were too busy becoming a billionaire to read them, weren't you?" The world was crashing down around him. 4 boys, his boys. Growing up without him right here in his family's garden, while he spent 10 years chasing wealth and power. "That's impossible. I never received any—" "Mr. Sterling," a small voice interrupted them. One of the boys had approached, ball in hand. "Would you like to play with us?" Nathaniel stared at the child, his child, and felt his carefully built world shatter into a million pieces. The boy had his mother's smile, but everything else was him, 4 sons he never knew existed. 4 pieces of his heart he'd never known were missing. And Elena, looking at him with eyes that held a decade of pain and secrets. What had he done? And more importantly, who had made sure he never knew about his children? The answer would change everything. Margaret Sterling watched from the terrace as her son stood frozen in the garden, staring at the 4 boys who were his mirror image. She gripped her champagne glass tighter, remembering the day 10 years ago when her husband handled the situation. "They're your grandsons," Eleanor's voice came from behind her. "In case you were wondering." Margaret turned to face the younger woman. "You should have left when we asked you to." "And go where? I was 18 and pregnant. Your husband made sure no one would hire me anywhere else." Eleanor's eyes were hard. "At least here I could keep my children close to their family, even if they didn't know it." In the garden, Nathaniel was kneeling down to the boys' level. They surrounded him like excited puppies, showing him their soccer moves. He looked lost, overwhelmed. "What are their names?" he asked Elena, his voice breaking. "Alexander, Michael, David, and James." Elena's voice softened when she spoke of her sons. They just turned 9 last month. 9 years. 9 birthdays he'd missed. 9 Christmas mornings. 9 first days of school. Nathaniel felt sick. They're so perfect. He couldn't stop staring at them. Alexander had a small scar on his chin, just like the one Nathaniel got falling off his bike as a kid. Michael bit his lower lip when he concentrated, exactly the way Nathaniel did during meetings. "Mr. Sterling?" David, the quietest of the 4, tugged at his sleeve. "Mum says you own this whole place. Is that true?" Before Nathaniel could answer, his father's voice boomed across the garden. "What's going on here?" Richard Sterling, patriarch of the Sterling Empire, stood at the garden entrance. His face darkened when he saw Nathaniel with the boys. Everyone inside. Now. Richard's command cut through the air like a whip. "Elena, take the children to their quarters." "No." Nathaniel stood up. "They're staying. We need to talk, Father. About the letters Elena sent. About the calls you apparently made disappear." Richard's face remained stone cold. "You were destined for greater things than playing house with the help's daughter. I did what was necessary." "Necessary?" Nathaniel's voice rose. "You kept my children from me." "I kept you focused on your future," Richard shouted back. "Look at what you've achieved. You're one of the most powerful men in the country. And I'm a stranger to my own sons." The pain in Nathaniel's voice made Elena's heart twist despite everything. The boys huddled closer to their mother, scared by the shouting. James, always the protector, stepped in front of his brothers. "Don't yell at our mom," he said bravely. Glaring at Richard, Margaret gasped. The boy had Nathaniel's exact expression when he used to stand up to his father as a teenager. Richard's face turned purple. "This ends now. Elena, pack your things. You and the boys are leaving. I'll arrange a generous settlement." "They're not going anywhere." Nathaniel's voice was deadly quiet. "And if they do, I'm going with them." Eleanor's head snapped up. This was the Nathaniel she remembered, the one who used to dream of defying his father before ambition consumed him. "Don't be ridiculous," Richard scoffed. "You have responsibilities. The company can run itself for a while." Nathaniel pulled out his phone. "In fact, let me call the board right now. I'm sure they'd be interested to know how the CEO's father hid the existence of his grandchildren for 9 years. Richard paled. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Nathaniel's finger hovered over the phone. "I've missed 9 years with my sons because of you. I won't miss another day." Elena watched the scene unfold, her heart racing. The boys pressed against her legs, confused and scared. This wasn't how she'd planned for them to learn about their father. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "the boys have school tomorrow. They need their routine." He turned to her, his eyes pleading. "Let me be part of that routine. Please, Eleanor. I know I don't deserve it, but—" "You're damn right you don't deserve it," Richard interrupted. "I didn't raise you. To throw everything away for what, Father? My children, the woman I—" Nathaniel stopped, looking at Eleanor. Even after 10 years, he couldn't say the words. Not yet. Alexander, the most perceptive of the 4, looked between Nathaniel and his mother. "Mom, is Mr. Sterling—" Is he our dad?" The garden fell silent. Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, baby, he is." The boys' reactions were as different as their personalities. Alexander stood straighter, studying Nathaniel with intense curiosity. Michael stepped back, uncertain. David's eyes filled with tears. And James walked right up to Nathaniel and kicked him in the shin. "You made Mum cry," he accused. "She cries at night sometimes when she thinks we're sleeping." Nathaniel didn't even flinch from the kick. He deserved that and more. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, looking at Eleanor. "I'm so sorry for everything." Richard cleared his throat. "This is all very touching, but nothing." Margaret suddenly spoke up. Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. "Richard, enough. These are our grandchildren. We've already lost 9 years with them. I won't lose any more because of your pride." Elena felt her knees go weak. After all these years of cold shoulders and barely concealed disdain, Margaret Sterling was finally acknowledging her grandsons. The boys looked at their grandmother with wide eyes. She'd always been kind to them, sneaking them cookies and giving them presents at Christmas, but they'd never understood why she seemed sad when she looked at them. "Mom's right." Nathaniel's voice was firm. "Things are going to change, starting now." He looked at his sons, and then at Elena. The girl he'd left behind had become a strong, amazing woman who'd raised 4 incredible boys all on her own. He had so much to make up for, so much to learn. "If you'll let me," he said softly to Elena, "I want to know them. All of them. Every detail. Every story. Everything I've missed." Elena looked at her sons' faces, some confused, some angry, some hopeful, and knew her answer would change all their lives forever. The next morning, Elena woke up early as usual to get the boys ready for school. But today was different. The events from yesterday's party had turned their world upside down. "I don't want to see him," James declared at breakfast, stabbing his pancakes angrily. "He's not our real dad. Dads are supposed to be there." "James," Elena sighed, running her fingers through his dark curls. "It's complicated, sweetheart." "I want to know him," Alexander spoke up. "He was always the most thoughtful of the 4. Don't we deserve to know where we come from?" Michael and David stayed quiet, pushing their food around their plates. Elena's heart ached for her boys. They'd been perfectly happy yesterday morning, and now everything was confused. The doorbell rang. Elena froze. It was too early for visitors. "I'll get it." Alexander jumped up before she could stop him. Nathaniel Sterling stood at the door of their modest house at the edge of the estate's grounds. He'd traded his expensive suit for jeans and a simple button-down shirt. In his hands, he held 4 identical backpacks. "Good morning," he said nervously. I thought maybe I could drive the boys to school." Eleanor appeared behind Alexander. "We usually take the bus." "I know. I asked Martha, the housekeeper. She's been telling me everything this morning about their schedule, their favorite foods, their allergies. Michael can't eat peanuts, right?" Elena nodded, surprised he'd already learned that detail. "I got them each a backpack," he continued quickly. "I didn't know what they liked, so I got them all different colors. And I called the school. They're adding me to the emergency contact list and—" "You did what?" Eleanor interrupted. "Without asking me?" Nathaniel's face fell. "I'm sorry. I want to be involved. I want to do this right." "Mom?" David's small voice came from behind her. "Can we ride in his car? Joey from school says his dad has a really cool car." Elena looked at her quietest son. David had always been fascinated by cars, drawing them in his notebooks during class. "It's a Range Rover," Nathaniel said hopefully. "Very safe, all the latest safety features." James appeared, still scowling. "The bus is fine. The bus is boring," Michael finally spoke up. "And Tommy always pulls my hair." Elena felt a headache coming on. How had her simple morning routine turned into this complicated situation? "Fine," she said finally, "but I'm coming with you." The drive to school was awkward. Nathaniel kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the boys, trying to memorize their faces. Alexander sat in front, asking questions about the car's features. Michael and David whispered to each other in the back, while James stared out the window, refusing to speak. "The boys have soccer practice after school," Elena said as they pulled up to the elementary school. 3:30. "I'll be here," Nathaniel said quickly. Too quickly. "You have a company to run," Elena reminded him. "I've called an emergency family leave. The board can handle things for a while." He turned to face her. "Elena, please, let me try to make up for lost time." Before she could respond, the boys were climbing out of the car. Other parents stared. Everyone knew Elena Ruiz's story, the single mother with quadruplets who worked at the Sterling estate. Now here she was with Nathaniel Sterling himself. "Have a good day at school," Nathaniel called out. The boys walked away, Alexander turning to wave, James pulling his brothers along faster. "They hate me," Nathaniel said quietly. "They don't know you," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." "Will you have coffee with me?" he asked suddenly. "There's so much we need to talk about." Elena checked her watch. The gardens needed tending, but 1 hour, she agreed. "There's a diner down the street." At Joe's coffee shop, Elena stirred her coffee while Nathaniel talked. He told her about the company, his achievements, his lonely penthouse apartment. "I dated," he admitted. "Nothing serious, no one was you." "Don't," Elena warned. "We're not doing this. This is about the boys." "Of course." He pulled out his phone, showing her his calendar app. "I've cleared everything. I want to be at their soccer practices, their school events. I want to learn everything about them. They're not a business project, Nathaniel. You can't just restructure their lives to fit your schedule. I know that." He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I know I'm doing everything wrong. But Elena, they're my sons, our sons. Please tell me how to do this right." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. The powerful businessman was gone. In his place was the boy she'd fallen in love with all those years ago, the one who used to dream under the stars with her in the garden. "Start slow," she said finally. "Come to soccer practice, have dinner with us sometimes, let them get to know you at their own pace." "And you?" he asked softly. "Will you let me get to know you again too?" Elena stood up. "I have work to do. The roses need pruning. I meant what I said yesterday," he called after her. "If anyone tries to make you and the boys leave, I'm going with you." She paused at the door. "We'll see you at soccer practice, Mr. Sterling." "Nathaniel," he corrected. "Please, Elena, at least call me Nathaniel again." She left without answering, her heart beating too fast. The boys needed their father. She'd always known that. But she hadn't expected it to hurt this much, seeing him try so hard, remembering everything they'd lost. Back at the estate, Richard Sterling watched from his study window as Elena returned to work in the gardens. His phone rang. "Yes?" he answered. "No, this changes nothing. The merger goes forward as planned. My son is distracted at the moment, which makes this the perfect time to move forward. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will be too late." He hung up, smiling coldly. Let Nathaniel play happy families for now. Soon he'd learn that some choices can't be undone, and some bridges stay burned forever. The soccer field buzzed with activity as parents gathered to watch their children practice. Eleanor sat in her usual spot on the bleachers, checking her phone for work messages. The roses were blooming early this year, and she needed to adjust the watering schedule. Murmur went through the crowd as a black Range Rover pulled into the parking lot. Nathaniel Sterling stepped out, carrying 4 sports drinks in different colors. "Blue for Alexander, red for Michael, green for David, and orange for James," he said proudly, sitting next to Elena. I remembered. She couldn't help but smile. "James might throw his at you. I'll take my chances." On the field, the boys were running drills. Alexander was a natural leader, helping younger kids with their technique. Michael played defense, calculating each move carefully. David stuck close to his brothers, while James attacked the ball with fierce determination. "They're amazing," Nathaniel breathed. "Alexander's going to be captain one day." "He already is," Elena said. "Youngest team captain in the league's history." Nathaniel's face fell slightly, another milestone he'd missed. "Excuse me," a woman approached them nervously. "Are you really Nathaniel Sterling?" Soon a small crowd gathered. Everyone wanted to talk to the billionaire. Elena watched as he handled them politely but kept his eyes on the field, not wanting to miss a moment of practice. "Mom," James's voice cut through the chatter. "Watch this." He kicked the ball with perfect form, scoring a goal. The crowd cheered, but James only looked at Eleanor. "That's my boy." Nathaniel called out without thinking. James's face darkened. He grabbed the ball and kicked it directly at Nathaniel's head. Thanks to quick reflexes from his own soccer days, Nathaniel caught it. "James!" Elena stood up. "Apologize right now." "No," James shouted. "He's not my dad. He doesn't get to say that." The boy ran off the field toward the locker rooms. His brothers looked torn between following him and continuing practice. "I'll go," Nathaniel said quietly. "Maybe I should." Elena started. "Please, let me try." Nathaniel found James sitting on a bench in the empty locker room, angrily wiping tears from his face. "That was a great kick," Nathaniel said, sitting down at the other end of the bench. "Perfect form, strong leg." "Go away. You know, I used to play soccer too, right here on this field." James said nothing. "I was angry like you once," Nathaniel continued. "At my father. He was always pushing me to be perfect, to focus on business instead of things I loved, like soccer. And your mom." James looked up slightly. "Did you hate him?" "Sometimes, but mostly I was hurt and scared that I'd never be good enough." "I'm not scared," James muttered. "And I'm not hurt. I just hate you." "That's fair." Nathaniel nodded. "I hate myself too for missing so much, for not being there when you guys were born, for not teaching you how to ride bikes or reading you bedtime stories. Mom does all that stuff. We don't need you." "You're right. Your mom is incredible. She's done an amazing job raising you boys. But James, if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be part of your life now." "Why? Because we're some big secret you just found out about? Because you feel guilty?" Nathaniel was surprised by the boy's insight. "Because you're my sons. And because every time I look at you four, I see everything that matters in life. Everything. I was too stupid to understand 10 years ago." James picked at a loose thread on his soccer shorts. "You made Mom sad. I know. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that. You can't just buy us stuff and make everything." "Okay, I know that too." Nathaniel smiled sadly. "Though I did get you that orange sports drink you like." For a moment, James's lips twitched like he might smile, but he caught himself. "Whatever. I need to get back to practice." "Okay. But James, I'm going to be at every practice from now on. Every game too. You can hate me all you want, but I'm not going anywhere." Back on the field, Elena watched James return with Nathaniel following behind. Her son's face was still stormy, but something had shifted slightly. "Everything okay?" she asked as Nathaniel sat back down. "No," he said honestly, "but maybe someday it will be." Practice ended, and the boys gathered their things. Alexander immediately came to show Nathaniel a new trick he'd learned. Michael accepted his sports drink with a shy smile. David hovered nearby, listening. And James grabbed his orange drink without a word, but he didn't throw it at Nathaniel. "Progress. Can we get pizza?" David asked hopefully. Before Elena could answer, her phone rang. It was Richard Sterling's assistant. "Miss Ruiz? Mr. Sterling requests your presence in his study immediately. It's about your employment status." Eleanor's heart sank. She'd known this was coming. "I have to go," she told the boys. "Homework first, then maybe pizza." "I could take them," Nathaniel offered. "To that pizza place by the library? We could do homework there?" Elena looked at her sons' faces. Alexander eager, Michael curious, David hopeful, and James. James gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," she agreed. "But homework first, really." As she walked toward the main house, Elena tried to calm her racing heart. Richard Sterling had tried to force her out before. She'd survived then, she would survive now. But this time felt different. This time, Nathaniel was involved. And Richard Sterling had never been more dangerous than when he felt his control over his son slipping away. Richard Sterling's study was exactly as Elena remembered it from 10 years ago. Dark wooden panels, leather chairs, and the overwhelming smell of expensive cigars. He sat behind his massive desk, looking at papers she couldn't see. "Ah, Elena, please sit down." She remained standing. "What do you want, Mr. Sterling?" Always so direct. He smiled coldly. "Very well. I have a proposition for you. $5 million. A house anywhere you'd like, private school for the boys. All you have to do is leave the estate and take my grandchildren far away from here." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "No." "10 million, then?" "The answer is still no." Richard stood up slowly. "You're being unreasonable. Think about what's best for the boys. They could have everything they've ever wanted. They want their father." Elena shot back. "The father you kept from them for 9 years." Nathaniel was meant for greater things than playing house with the gardener's daughter. Richard's calm facade cracked. "Everything I did was to protect our family's legacy." "You mean your control over your son? You have no idea what's at stake." "Here?" Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "The merger with Davis Industries is weeks away from completion. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built." Elena's eyes narrowed. "What merger?" Richard's face changed as he realized his mistake. "Get out, and remember my offer. It won't stay open forever." Outside the study, Elena leaned against the wall, trying to calm her racing heart. A merger with Davis Industries. That would mean thousands of layoffs. She had to warn Nathaniel at Kai. Mario's Pizza. Nathaniel watched in amazement as his sons did their homework. Alexander helped Michael with math while David worked on a science project. Even James was quietly doing his English reading. "Dad?" Alexander's voice made everyone freeze. It was the first time any of them had called him that. "Can you help me with this business problem? We're learning about profit margins." Nathaniel's heart felt like it might burst. "Of course, buddy." He was explaining the concept when his phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Need to talk. Important. Meet me at the garden shed after the boys are home." 2 hours later, after making sure the boys were safely home with their homework done, Nathaniel walked through the darkening garden to the old shed where he and Elena used to meet as teenagers. She was waiting, pacing nervously. "Your father is planning to merge Sterling Enterprises with Davis Industries." Nathaniel froze. "That's impossible. That would destroy everything we've built. Half our employees would lose their jobs." "He let it slip during our meeting. He tried to bribe me to leave with the boys. $10 million. "What?" Nathaniel's voice was dangerous. "He's still trying to control everything. To control me." "There's more," Elena said quietly. "I've been thinking about those letters I sent you 10 years ago. The ones you never got." "What? About them?" "I sent them to your office at Sterling Tower, but your father's office was right next door. He must have intercepted them." Nathaniel started pacing. "The merger papers would be in his private safe. The one in his study. I need to see them." "The annual garden party is tomorrow night," Elena said. "Everyone will be in the ballroom. The study will be empty." Their eyes met in the dim light. "Just like old times, planning and scheming together." "Help me," Nathaniel said softly. "Help me stop him from destroying more lives." Elena nodded. "But the boys can't know anything about this. They've been through enough changes already. How are they doing, really? Alexander has already searched your name online. He knows everything about Sterling Enterprises. Michael keeps asking if you're really staying. David draws pictures of the 5 of us but hides them under his bed. And James still hates me. He asked me last night if you used to make me laugh. I think he wants to understand what happened between us." Nathaniel stepped closer. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that you made me laugh more than anyone, that we were young and in love, that sometimes life gets complicated." "Elena." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. "Don't. We need to focus on stopping your father and protecting our sons. Whatever was between us, that's in the past." But as she walked away, both of them knew she was lying. The past wasn't dead. It was alive in the faces of their 4 beautiful boys, in the way their hearts still raced when they stood close, in all the dreams they'd shared in this very garden. Tomorrow night would change everything. Again. The only question was whether they'd end up closer together or further apart. In his study, Richard Sterling made another phone call. "Everything's ready for tomorrow night?" "Good." Once the merger papers are signed, it won't matter what Nathaniel or that woman try to do. Oh, and one more thing. I want you to find those letters Elena claims she sent 10 years ago. If they still exist, destroy them. No one can ever know what really happened back then. No one. The annual Sterling Garden Party was in full swing. Hundreds of guests in expensive clothes wandered through the illuminated gardens, drinking champagne and discussing business deals. Elena watched from the catering area, making sure all the flower arrangements were perfect. "Mom?" Michael appeared at her side in his new suit. Nathaniel had insisted on buying the boys proper clothes for the party. "Grandmother wants us to meet. Some people," Elena straightened his tie, "remember what we talked about. If anyone asks too many questions, we say we need to find you or Dad." Michael nodded. He paused. "Is it okay that I called him Dad?" Elena hugged him close. "Of course. It is, sweetheart. Whatever feels right to you." Across the garden, Nathaniel was playing his part perfectly, smiling at investors, laughing at bad jokes, all while keeping an eye on Richard's study window. The plan was simple. When Richard made his big speech at 9 o'clock, Elena would create a distraction in the garden. Nathaniel would use that moment to slip into the study and find the merger documents. "Your boys are charming," a woman in diamonds told him. "They look just like you." "Thank you," Nathaniel smiled, watching Alexander confidently shake hands with a group of businessmen. The boy was a natural, just like him at that age. David stuck close to his grandmother, who was absolutely glowing as she introduced her grandchildren to her friends. Even James seemed to be behaving, though he kept shooting suspicious looks at Richard. "Sir," a waiter approached Nathaniel. "There's a call for you in the house, Mr. Davis himself." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. Michael Davis wasn't supposed to be involved tonight. He followed the waiter inside, but instead of going to the phone, he was led to the library. Richard was waiting there with Michael Davis. "Son," Richard smiled, "I think it's time we had a family discussion." "What's he doing here?" Nathaniel demanded. Now, Davis stepped forward. "Is that any way to talk to your future business partner?" "There is no future partnership. I'll never agree to the merger." "You don't have to," Richard said calmly. "The board already has. While you've been playing happy families this past week, I've been securing their votes. The papers will be signed tonight." "That's impossible. I'm the CEO. A position you seem to have forgotten about," Richard snapped. "The board has concerns about your recent behavior, your sudden leave of absence. You're at distractions." "My children are not distractions." "No," Davis smiled coldly. "They're leverage." Nathaniel's heart stopped. "What did you say?" "Think about it," Richard said. "A scandal about secret children would tank our stock price. The media would have a field day. Poor Elena would be hounded by reporters. The boys' lives would be turned upside down. You wouldn't dare." "Sign the merger papers," Davis said. "Step down as CEO. Take a nice long vacation with your new family. Everyone wins." "And if I refuse?" "Then tomorrow morning, every tabloid in the country gets an anonymous tip about Nathaniel Sterling's secret quadruplets, complete with photos from tonight's party. Imagine the headlines." Outside in the garden, Elena was getting nervous. Nathaniel was late for their signal. She watched Richard study, but there was no movement. "Miss Ruiz," a security guard approached her. "There's a delivery for you at the gate. Says it's urgent." Elena hesitated. This wasn't part of the plan. "I'll go." James offered, appearing beside her. "No," Elena said sharply. Something felt wrong. "Find your brothers. Stay together. Don't talk to anyone until I get back." She hurried to the gate, but there was no delivery. When she turned back, she saw Richard's assistant leading her boys into the house. "Mrs. Sterling wants to show them something," the assistant called out when she saw Elena's face. Elena's instincts screamed danger. She ran toward the house, but the crowd of party guests slowed her down. In the library, Nathaniel was staring at the merger papers when the door opened. His sons were led in by security guards. "Dad?" Alexander's voice shook slightly. "What's going on?" "Nothing, buddy." Nathaniel tried to sound calm. "Just some boring business talk." "Oh, it's much more than that," Richard said. "Boys, how would you like to be in the newspapers, on TV? Everyone would know you're Sterlings." "Father, stop this!" The choice is yours, son. Sign the papers or your boys become tomorrow's biggest headline. James looked between his father and grandfather, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're trying to hurt our dad. James, quiet, Nathaniel pleaded. No, James stepped forward. Mum said you were mean. She said you hurt her and Dad because you only care about money. She was right. Richard's face darkened. You need to learn some respect, young man. Leave him alone. Nathaniel's voice was thunder. The door burst open. Eleanor stood there, face flushed from running. Behind her was Margaret Sterling. Richard, Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. What are you doing with my grandsons? Stay out of this, Margaret. This is business. No. Margaret walked into the room. This is family, and I've watched you destroy this family for the last time. She reached into her evening bag and pulled out a stack of old, worn envelopes. Elena's letters, she said quietly. The ones you intercepted. I found them in your safe last year. I've been waiting for the right moment to return them. Richard's face went pale. You went through my safe. I went through everything, including your private accounts, the ones where you've been hiding money from the shareholders. Should we talk about that at the board meeting? The room went silent. Davis slowly backed away from Richard. I should go, he muttered. This seems like a family matter. Michael, Nathaniel's voice was steel. The merger's off, and if I ever see you near my family again. Davis fled the room. Elena gathered her boys close. They were scared but trying to be brave, just like their father. Richard looked around the room, at his wife's stern face, at his son's anger, at the grandchildren he'd tried to use as pawns. It's over, Father, Nathaniel said quietly. You've lost. But Richard Sterling wasn't done fighting. Not yet. And as he stormed out of the library, he was already planning his next move. In the sudden quiet, James tugged at Nathaniel's sleeve. Dad, did you really choose not to hurt us, even if it meant losing your company? Nathaniel knelt down to his son's level. I'd give up everything I own to keep you boys safe. I know I wasn't there before, but I'm here now, and nothing, no company, no money, nothing, is more important than you. For the first time, James didn't pull away when Nathaniel hugged him. Elena watched them, her heart full and breaking at the same time. The past week had changed, everything. But Richard Sterling was still out there, and she had a feeling their troubles were far from over. The morning after the garden party, Elena woke to find her small house filled with police officers. Miss Ruiz, a detective showed her his badge. We need to ask you some questions about Richard Sterling. Elena's heart raced. What happened? He's missing. His car was found abandoned by the river early this morning. The boys watched wide-eyed from the top of the stairs as Eleanor spoke with the police. She tried to keep her voice down, but in their small house, everything echoed. When was the last time you saw him? Last night, at the party. He left the library. Around 9. And you had an argument? Not exactly. It was complicated. The detective nodded. We understand there was some tension regarding your children's paternity. Before Elena could answer, there was a knock at the door. Nathaniel burst in, looking like he hadn't slept. I just heard, he said. Boys, get dressed. You're not going. To school today. Mr. Sterling, the detective turned to him. We'll need to speak with you as well. The next few hours were a blur of questions. Yes, Richard had been acting strangely. Yes, there had been arguments. No, they didn't know where. He might have gone. Finally, the police left. Elena made hot chocolate for the boys, while Nathaniel paced the small living room. He's doing this on purpose, Nathaniel said, trying to cause chaos, make everyone panic. The police said there were papers in his car, Elena said quietly. Merger, documents, and a letter. Nathaniel stopped pacing. What letter? They wouldn't say, but they're treating it like a possible... She glanced at the boys and mouthed the word suicide. Alexander, always observant, caught the word. Is grandfather going to die? No, sweetheart, Elena hugged him. He's just... lost right now. Like Dad was lost from us? Michael asked innocently. The room went quiet. James, who had been warming up to Nathaniel, suddenly looked angry again. This is all because of us, isn't it? He demanded. If we didn't exist, none of this would be happening. James! Eleanor and Nathaniel spoke at the same time. It's true, Grandfather hates us because we ruined everything. Listen to me. Nathaniel knelt in front of his son. None of this is your fault. Your grandfather, he's been controlling and manipulating people for so long he doesn't know how to stop. But finding out about you boys was the best thing that ever happened to me. Really? David's quiet voice spoke up. Even though it made you lose your company? I haven't lost anything, Nathaniel smiled. I've gained 4 amazing sons, and maybe, he glanced at Eleanor, maybe a chance to fix my biggest mistake. The phone rang, making everyone jump. Elena answered it. Margaret, slow down. What? When? We'll be right there. She hung up, her face pale. They found Richard's phone. He's made calls to every major news outlet in the country. The story about the boys, it's going to break tomorrow morning. Nathaniel swore under his breath. He's forcing our hand, making us go public on his terms. What does that mean? Alexander asked. Elena sat down, gathering her sons close. It means everyone's going to know that you're Nathaniel Sterling's children. There will be reporters, photographers. We'll need to move you somewhere safe, Nathaniel said. I have a house in the Hamptons, private, gated. No, Elena cut him off. We're not running away. These boys have friends here, schools, their whole lives. We'll face this together. Nathaniel stared at her with something like awe. She was so much stronger than he remembered. Dad? James tugged at his sleeve. Are people going to be mean to Mom? Because of us? No, Nathaniel said firmly. Because I'm going to call a press conference right now. I'm going to tell our story first, before your grandfather can twist it. I'm going to tell everyone how your mother raised 4 amazing boys, all on her own, how she's the strongest person I know, and how finding you all has made me realize what really matters in life. Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. This was the Nathaniel she'd fallen in love with, passionate, protective, willing to fight for what he believed in. What about Grandfather? David asked. He'll turn up, Margaret said from the doorway. No one had heard her come in. He always does when he wants attention, but this time things will be different. I've called an emergency board meeting. Richard's financial irregularities, his attempts at blackmail. It's all coming out. Mom, Nathaniel looked surprised. You're really doing this? I should have done it years ago, when he drove you and Elena apart, when he hid those letters. She walked over to her grandsons. I failed this family once. I won't fail again. Suddenly, Elena's phone buzzed. A news alert. Her hands shook as she read it. They found him. She whispered. At a hotel in Boston. He's called another press conference in an hour. Nathaniel grabbed his car keys. I'm going. I need to stop him before... We're coming too, James said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. He's trying to hurt our family. All of us. We should face him together. Elena felt her heart swell with pride. Her angry, hurting son was choosing to stand with his father. Together, she agreed, taking Nathaniel's hand. They had an hour to get to Boston, an hour to stop Richard Sterling from destroying their family one last time. But this time, they weren't. Scared teenagers or a lonely single mother or a wealth-obsessed businessman. This time they were a family, and families fight for each other. The drive to Boston was tense. Eleanor sat in the back of Nathaniel's Range Rover with the boys while Margaret rode in front. James held her hand tightly, trying to act brave. Alexander kept checking news updates. On his phone, Michael and David had fallen asleep against each other. He's at the Four Seasons, Margaret said, hanging up her phone. The press is already gathering. Nathaniel pressed harder on the gas pedal. We need to get there before he starts talking. What's he going to say? Alexander asked. About us? Nothing true, Margaret replied firmly. Your grandfather, he twists things to get what he wants. He's done it for years. Elena remembered the first time she'd experienced Richard Sterling's manipulation. She'd been 17, in love with Nathaniel, dreaming of their future. Richard had called her to his study. You're holding him back, he'd said. If you really love him, you'll let him go. She hadn't listened then, but when the pregnancy test turned positive months later and none of her calls or letters to Nathaniel were answered, she'd believed Richard's lies about Nathaniel not wanting to see her. The car pulled up to the Four Seasons. Reporters crowded the entrance, but they weren't looking for Nathaniel yet. No one knew the real story was arriving in a family SUV. "Stay close to me," Eleanor told her sons as they walked through the lobby. The hotel staff recognized Nathaniel immediately and directed them to the ballroom where Richard's press conference was about to begin. They could hear his voice through the doors. Tragic story of manipulation and greed. Nathaniel burst through the doors, Eleanor and the boys right behind him. Camera flashes exploded around them. Richard stood at the podium, his face going pale at the sight of them. He'd clearly been crying, or pretending to cry, his usual perfect appearance disheveled. "Son," he said into the microphone, "this is a private matter." "No more private matters," Nathaniel strode to the podium. "No more secrets. No more lies." The reporters were going crazy, especially when they noticed the four boys who looked exactly like Nathaniel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard tried to recover, "this is exactly what I was about to discuss. The tragic story of how a former employee tried to trap my son." "That's a lie," James shouted. The room went silent at the child's voice. "You're the liar. You hid Mom's letters. You tried to make us go away." More camera flashes. Elena tried to shield the boys, but they moved forward with Nathaniel. "My name is Nathaniel Sterling," he spoke clearly into the microphone. "And yes, these are my sons. Sons I didn't know existed because my father intercepted their mother's letters 10 years ago. Sons he tried to hide because they didn't fit into his perfect plan for my life." Richard grabbed for the microphone. "You're emotionally compromised. The board has concerns." "The board," Margaret's voice rang out, "has just voted to remove you as chairman, Richard. Your financial misconduct, your attempted blackmail of our own son. You can't prove anything." "Actually," a new voice spoke from the back of the room. Davis stepped forward. "I recorded our conversation last night, the one where you suggested using the children as leverage. My lawyers have already turned it over to the SEC." Richard's face turned purple. "You traitor! We had a deal." "The deal's off," Davis smiled coldly. "Your son was right. The merger would have destroyed too many lives. I have children too. I couldn't sleep knowing what you were willing to do to your own grandchildren." The reporters were scribbling frantically. Richard looked around wildly, seeing nothing but hostile faces. "Everything I did," he shouted, "I did for this family, for our legacy." "No, Father," Nathaniel said quietly. "You did it for yourself, for control. But look around, you've lost control, and you know what? Nothing bad happened. The world didn't end because I found my children. The company won't collapse because I'm choosing family over profit." Eleanor stepped forward with the boys. "These past 10 years, I've taught our sons that family means loving each other, supporting each other, being honest with each other. Things you never taught Nathaniel." "How dare you?" Richard started, but Margaret cut him off. "She's right." Margaret's voice shook. "I stood by for years while you manipulated our son, while you drove away the woman he loved, while you hid my grandchildren from me. Not anymore." Security guards appeared at Richard's elbows. "Mr. Sterling, the board would like to see you, and the SEC has some questions." As they led him away, Richard kept shouting about ingrates and traitors, but no one was listening anymore. The reporters had a much better story. The prodigal father reunited with his sons, the grandmother who helped expose a decade of lies, the strong mother who raised 4 boys alone. Alexander tugged at Nathaniel's sleeve. "Dad, are we going to be in the newspapers?" "Probably, buddy. But don't worry, we'll face it together." "As a family?" David asked hopefully. "As a family," Elena confirmed. James looked up at his father. "Does this mean you're really staying, forever?" Nathaniel knelt down to his son's level, not caring about the cameras still flashing around them. "Forever and ever. Wild horses couldn't drag me away from you boys again." "What about Mom?" Michael asked innocently. "Are you staying with her too?" Elena felt her face flush as Nathaniel looked at her. In his eyes, she saw the same love that had been there 10 years ago, but deeper now, tempered by time and regret and hope. "That," he said softly, "is up to your mother." The reporters pressed closer, eager for more drama, more revelations. But Elena just smiled and gathered her boys close. "Let's go home," she said. "We have a lot to talk about." As they walked out of the hotel, cameras following their every move, Eleanor felt something shift in her heart. The past wasn't just past anymore. It was weaving itself into their future, giving them a second chance at the happiness they'd lost. And this time, nothing and no one would tear them apart. A week after the press conference, life was anything but normal for the Sterling Ruiz family. Reporters camped outside Elena's small house, forcing them to temporarily move into the main mansion. The boys were adjusting to their new reality, which included round-the-clock security, and their pictures splashed across every magazine cover in the country. "Look at this one." Alexander showed his brothers the latest headline. "Sterling quadruplets. America's newest heirs, they're calling us princes." "We're not princes," James grumbled, but Elena noticed he'd kept every newspaper article about their family. Margaret had transformed the east wing of the mansion into a wonderland for her grandsons. Each boy got his own room, decorated to match their personalities. Alexander's walls were covered in world maps and business books. Michael had a massive art station. David's room was filled with model cars. And James, despite his protests, couldn't hide his joy at the soccer-themed space. Elena stood in the doorway of her old room in the servants' quarters, packing the last of their things. So many memories here. The tiny crib she'd somehow fit 4 babies into. The worn rocking chair where she'd spent countless nights. The window where she used to watch Nathaniel's car drive away to the city. Need help? She turned to find Nathaniel in the doorway, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. He'd traded his suits for jeans and casual shirts, working from home, to spend more time with the boys. "Just finishing up," she said. "The boys are excited about their new rooms." "And you? How do you feel about moving into the main house?" Eleanor sighed. "It makes sense with the media circus, but this was our home. Small as it was, we were happy here." "You made a beautiful home for them." Nathaniel looked around the modest room. "You did everything right, Elena. While I was chasing empty success, you were building something real." "We can't change the past," Elena said softly. "No, but we can build a better future." He stepped closer. "The boys told me you never dated all these years." "I was busy," she cut him off. 4 boys don't raise themselves." "Elena." A commotion from outside interrupted them. David came running in. "Mom, Dad, Grandmother's trying to make us wear suits for the TV interview." "Right, the interview." After a week of speculation and tabloid stories, they'd agreed to do one official interview with a respected journalist. "Set the record straight. We don't have to do this," Nathaniel said as they walked to the main house. "We can cancel." "No," Elena shook her head. "The boys need to see us handling this with grace. No more running, no more hiding." The living room had been transformed into a TV studio. Margaret had insisted on doing the interview at home, where the boys would be comfortable. The journalist, Sarah Chen, was setting up with her crew. "Remember what we practiced," Eleanor told the boys. "Just be yourselves. You don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable." The interview started smoothly. Sarah asked about the boys' personalities, their interests, their life before the revelation. But then she turned to harder questions. "Eleanor, there's been speculation about your motives. Some are suggesting you orchestrated this whole thing." "That's ridiculous," Nathaniel interrupted. "Elena tried to tell me about the pregnancy. My father intercepted her letters." "Do you have proof of these letters?" "We do," Margaret spoke up. She'd insisted on being part of the interview. "I found them in Richard's safe, along with evidence of his other crimes." Speaking of Richard Sterling, he's now facing federal charges for financial fraud. How do the boys feel about their grandfather being in legal trouble? James surprised everyone by answering. "He tried to hurt our family. He wanted to send us away because we didn't fit his plan. That's not what grandfathers are supposed to do." Sarah turned to Nathaniel. "Your father claims he was protecting the company, that the scandal of a secret family would have destroyed shareholder value. The only thing being destroyed was the truth," Nathaniel said firmly. "I've spent the past week getting to know my sons, and I can tell you they're worth more than any company. They're smart, kind, brave, everything I hope to be someday." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. The boys beamed at their father's words. "And what about you two?" Sarah asked. "There's obvious chemistry still there. Are wedding bells in the future?" That's not... Elena started, but Nathaniel took her hand. I never stopped loving her, he said simply. Every success felt empty because she wasn't there to share it. Finding out about the boys, it was like waking up from a 10-year nightmare. But I know I have to earn back her trust. I'm willing to spend the rest of my life doing that. The room went quiet. Even Sarah seemed touched. Mom? Alexander's voice broke the silence. Do you still love Dad? All cameras turned to Elena. She looked at Nathaniel, saw the hope and fear in his eyes, saw the boy she'd fallen in love with, and the man he'd become. Love was never our problem, she said softly. It was trust. But seeing him with you boys this past week, seeing him choose you over everything else. Yes, I still love him. I think I always will. Nathaniel's grip on her hand tightened. The boys were grinning. Even James looked happy. One final question, Sarah said. What's next for the Sterling Ruiz family? Healing, Elena answered. Learning to be a family, taking things one day at a time. And ice cream, David added seriously. Dad promised ice cream after this. Everyone laughed. The tension broke. They were just a family again, figuring things out together. After the interview, as they walked to the kitchen for the promised ice cream, Nathaniel pulled Elena aside. Did you mean it? About still loving me? She looked at their sons happily arguing about ice cream flavors with their grandmother. Every word, but Nathaniel, we have to be sure. The boys are the best thing that ever happened to us, he finished. They're our second chance, Elena. At everything. In the kitchen, James was actually letting Nathaniel help him make a sundae. Alexander was explaining business concepts to Margaret. Michael and David were creating elaborate ice cream architecture. One day at a time, Eleanor asked. Nathaniel smiled. One day at a time, but they both knew their story was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the day Nathaniel Sterling discovered he had 4 sons. The media frenzy had died down, replaced by occasional society page updates about America's favorite family. Richard Sterling had pleaded guilty to multiple charges of financial fraud and was serving his sentence under house arrest at a distant property. The Sterling Company was thriving under new leadership. Nathaniel had stepped back to a chairman role, giving him more time with his family. The garden where it all began was in full bloom. Elena walked through the roses, checking for any signs of disease or decay. Some habits were hard to break, even though she was no longer officially the head gardener. Still keeping an eye on things. Nathaniel's voice came from behind her. The new gardener overwatered the hydrangeas, she said, not turning around. Again. He laughed, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, something she'd only recently allowed herself to do again. The boys are looking for you, he said. Something about needing help with their science project. The volcano? Elena groaned. I told them no explosions in the house. That's why they set it up in the garden, behind the tool shed. They walked hand in hand toward the sound of excited boy chatter. The past 6 months had been a journey of healing, of learning to be a family. There had been tough moments. James still had occasional angry outbursts. The boys sometimes felt overwhelmed by their new lifestyle, and Elena and Nathaniel had to navigate the delicate balance between past hurts and present hopes. But there had been beautiful moments too. The first time all 4 boys called Nathaniel Dad without hesitation. The day Elena found Alexander teaching his brothers about stock markets using cookies as trading chips. The night David had a nightmare and ran to both his parents for comfort. They rounded the corner to find an impressive papier-mâché volcano surrounded by 4 very excited boys and one nervous-looking grandmother. Mom, Dad, watch this. Michael poured something into the top of the volcano. Wait, Elena and Nathaniel shouted together, but it was too late. Red foam exploded everywhere, covering the boys in sticky goo. Instead of being upset, they howled with laughter. Even Margaret, who got splashed, was giggling. Best science project ever, David declared. We're totally getting an A, Alexander added. If we don't get suspended for making a mess, James grinned. Elena looked at her sons, all 5 of them, since Nathaniel was now equally covered in foam as he helped them clean up. This was her family. Messy, complicated, perfect. Miss Ruiz, one of the security guards, approached. There's someone at the gate for you. Says she's your mother. Eleanor froze. She hadn't seen her mother since the day she'd left with the boys, claiming she couldn't bear the shame of her daughter's situation. We'll come with you, Nathaniel said immediately. No, Elena squared her shoulders. I need to do this alone. Her mother looked older, smaller somehow. She clutched her purse nervously as Elena approached. Elena, she said softly. I saw you on TV, the interview, the boys. They're so big now. They're amazing, Elena said. No thanks to you. I know I was wrong, so wrong. When your father died last month, it made me realize life's too short for pride, too short to miss out on knowing my grandsons. Elena felt tears, burning in her eyes. You left us when we needed you most, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But Elena, please, let me try to make it right. Before Elena could respond, she heard running feet behind her. Mom, Alexander called out. The volcano exploded again and… Oh. All four boys skidded to a stop, staring at the stranger who looked so much like their mother. Boys, Elena wiped her eyes. This is your grandmother, your other grandmother. Do you like science? David asked immediately. And soccer. James, Haddad, and cookies, Michael chimed in. Elena's mother laughed through her tears. I love all those things, and I'd love to learn what else you like. Come see our volcano. They grabbed her hands, pulling her toward the garden. Nathaniel appeared at Elena's side. You okay? I don't know, she admitted. It's a lot of forgiveness in 1 year. You taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, he said. It's about choosing to move forward, choosing love over hurt. Elena watched as her sons showed their grandmother their exploding science project. Margaret joined them, the two grandmothers tentatively beginning to chat. Speaking of moving forward, Nathaniel said nervously, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Eleanor turned to find him down on one knee, holding a small box. 10 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life, he said. I chose ambition over love, but these past 6 months have shown me what really matters. You. Our boys, this family we're building. Nathaniel. Carolina Ruiz, you're the strongest, most amazing woman I've ever known. You raised our sons to be incredible people. You taught me what real love looks like. Will you marry me? Before she could answer, 4 voices shouted from behind them. Say, yes, Mom. Elena looked at her sons, covered in volcano foam, grinning widely, so happy and loved. She looked at Nathaniel, the man who'd found his way back to her, who'd chosen their family over everything else. Yes, she whispered. Yes to everything. The boys charged forward, tackling their parents in a group hug. Both grandmothers wiped away tears. And in the garden where their story began, where a young gardener's daughter had fallen in love with a billionaire's son, where 4 beautiful boys had grown up watching their mother tend the roses, a new chapter was beginning. I love you, Nathaniel whispered, sliding the ring onto her finger. All of you, forever. Forever, the boys echoed. Elena looked at her family, messy, complicated, perfectly imperfect, and knew that sometimes the biggest mistakes could lead to the most beautiful second chances. In the distance, the old garden shed still stood, holding the memories of first loves and broken hearts. But now it would hold new memories too, of 4 boys learning to trust their father, of 2 people finding their way back to each other, of a family healing, growing, blooming like the roses Elena had tended for so long. Some people said it was like a fairy tale. The gardener's daughter and the billionaire's son reunited by the children he never knew he had. But Elena knew better. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and real and sometimes still scary, but it was their story, and it was just beginning. Group hug, David called out, and everyone joined in, laughing and crying and covered in volcano. Foam, this was love, this was family, this was home, and in the end that was all that really mattered.